All right, so I'm gonna do a more extended breakdown on this for Tuesday. I was gonna do it tonight, but this was a little more involved than I expected. So Tucker sat down with Scott Bessent to ask him what the hell's going on with these tariffs and to put people's minds at ease. Now, I just
People
want
seem
to
upset. People seem really upset about this. I don't know why.
well, people are very upset. They don't seem to understand what the hell the president is doing.
What the hell's going on?
They don't know why they're losing their jobs and they can't afford anything. Can you explain it? Now, it's always funny to me with Scott Bessent because, look, man, not everybody who's a Trump supporter is a conspiracist who hates George Soros, but, 99% of them are.
That's certainly the base.
That's certainly the base. That's certainly if your life depended on guessing if a Trump supporter was a conspiracist who hates George Soros, you certainly would guess the affirmative. So it's always funny to me that nobody complains that this is who he appointed to run the Treasury. He helped break the Bank of England. And that's really funny because that's something they always bring up about Soros, about how evil he is. He broke the Bank of England. 3 decades before he was tapped to lead the Treasury Department, Scott Bessent was asked to help break another country's financial system. Then 29 years old, Mr. Bessent, working for the financier George Soros, helped break the Bank of England with crushing trades against the British pound. He was on a small team at Mr. Soros's investment firm that in 1992 amassed a $10 billion bet that the pound was overvalued. Though the British government tried to support the currency, it wasn't able to withstand the pressure, and the pound plunged in value. Mr. Soros's fund earned more than $1 billion, along with credit and infamy, for orchestrating one of Wall Street's most audacious trades. Now, this is the same Scott Bessent that we're supposed to trust when he tells us this is all going to work out. So I just wanted to give this some context before we get into his remarks. All right, so we're going to look at a few clips, including a response from Peter Schaefer that's going around. All right, so let's see what he said.
Who thinks that these market declines are all based on the president's economic policies. I can tell you that this market decline started with the Chinese AI announcement of DeepSeek.
Right.
So the so-called Mag 7, the tech stocks, had been doing very well for about 18 months, led the market, and I think that there was kind of a real dose of reality in what was going on in AI. And I think U.S. is going to remain the leader in AI, but the AI-related stocks started coming down. So, like, if I were to analyze in my old hat, and this is the only time I'm going to talk about it, my old hat, what's happening with the market, I'd say it's more a Mag 7 problem and not a MAGA problem.
Right.
Okay. That's a pretty absurd thing to say. Now, let's take a look at the charts. He's not wrong as far as it goes that after they announced DeepSeek, it kind of, that was about the end of January. It was about January 27th, 28th that all that came out. It kind of coasted along and started to come down. But it was fine for about a month after that. So can you really say it was a DeepSeek problem and not that they started to realize Trump's really going to impose these tariffs? You can't really say that given that it held up for about a month after the DeepSeek stuff. A lot of the Wall Street conversation was actually, you know what, they probably exaggerated. It's probably not true. Who knows what the truth is? And they kind of kept the party going. So you want to say this is because of DeepSeek? I don't know, man. That's a pretty long lag. But what you definitely can argue is this. This happened right after the trade was announced. So to argue this is not MAGA, this is from something that happened back at the end of January, that's pretty ridiculous. You want to say that the tech stocks were overvalued? The tech stocks have been overvalued for at least a decade. So to say that the jig was up, no, nobody can really say that. Maybe yes, maybe no. But to say this has nothing to do with that when you've got a vertical line falling off a cliff as soon as Trump announces the tariffs, that's pretty absurd. So to say, no, this is not Trump's trade policies, this is a Mag 7 drop, that's pretty typical of the level of honesty that we would expect from George Soros's old protege.
Over time, we'll have substantial tariff income in the beginning.
All right, so this is him explaining how he thinks this is all going to play out, what the theory of the case is.
Over time, we'll have substantial tariff income in the beginning. Manufacturers will build their factory here. The tariffs will drop, but the revenue from the factories, from income taxes, from all the new jobs will go up. So we'll be taking it in domestically as the tariffs drop. And why are the tariffs dropping? Because we're making it here and our trade deficit's dropping.
So you've obviously thought this through. You think that the United States has the necessary labor force for this transition?
I think we do. I think with AI, with automation, with so many of these factories are going to be new. They're going to be smart factories that I think we've got all the labor force we need.
Listen carefully to what he just said. Tucker said, are we going to have enough labor for all this? And what did he say? He didn't say, oh, yes, the American people are eager for work. They've been crowded out by illegal immigrants. They're going to staff those factories. No, he went right to AI. He went right to AI. Now, is he the only one talking like that? Can you dismiss that as a one-off? Well, no. Let's look at the first runner-up to Rabbi Shmuley for biggest purveyor of anti-Semitism in the world. He himself started talking about how the robots are going to do the work.
Is in our workers. The American workers have been given the raw deal. And what's going to happen now is we're going to build factories and we're going to train and we're going to have trade craft. We're going to do the greatest set of training ever. And our high school educated people, they're going to train to do robotics mechanics. It's kind of like a supercharged BMW mechanic, like you just can fix those robots. You can build air conditioning as an example, but that's for a fab or for a semiconductor factory. These are great paying jobs that are Americans. We're going to have 5 million of those jobs coming. And America is going to retool. It's going to do manufacturing, and robotics can sew as well. You've never seen anything like what you're going to see, the renaissance of American manufacturing coming because Donald Trump is bringing them back. He's driving them back. $6 trillion, he said today, he's got committed to America. It's unbelievable.
Okay. All right. So you got the one guy says we have enough labor because of AI. You got the other guy saying, well, it's really going to be robots working, but don't worry. Everyone's going to go to DeVry and learn how to work on robots. So it'll be fine. It'll be fine. The workers are going to work on the robots. It'll be great. It's not going to be dystopian at all.
Now think of the absurdity of that. Think about the absurdity of that. I mean, if you're going to hire as many mechanics to fix the robots as workers that the robots are replacing, then why would you have the robots in the first place? Just have the workers do it.
It's just bullshit. It's like
it makes it obvious. Yeah,
it's like when Bezos starts rambling on the launch pad about mining the moon. These guys are so rich, nobody really questions them. When that clip of Lutnick going on about Social Security and how only the scammers are going to call the two kids that they threw out there to interview them, you hear them in the background going, wow.
Right.
Wow. Nobody questions this guy. That's why he doesn't have to think before he speaks. Yeah, no, it's going to be unbelievable. Idle. The high schools are going to train them in the robotics. So what about the rest of it? What about all of this factory manufacturing? All right. So Peter Schiff, who, is nicknamed Dr. Doom. To be fair, he does tend to predict the worst. But one of the worst he did predict in a whole big ass damn book was the housing crash in 2008. So he has some credibility when he speaks. So he got a lot of attention when he laid out pretty clearly why the idea that manufacturing is just going to move back into the United States like that is, as he calls it, a pipe dream.
Like, for example, people are talking about Nike, right? You know, Nike stock's at a 52-week low today. It's down 12%. And I hear people talk about, well, you know, because the sneakers are going to come in from Vietnam or China, where they're coming in, and they're subject to like a 40% tariff. And so Nike is going to have to jack up prices a lot. And they're saying, well, to avoid the tariffs, they could just build, you know, make the sneakers here. Well, how are they going to do that? The factories don't exist. And in order for Nike to build a shoe factory, who knows how long it's going to take. Plus, you got to put together all the supply chains domestically, because you can't import, you know, the leather, and you can't, you know, whatever. And then you have to have the workers that know how to do it. They're not here because we're not making shoes here. 98% of our shoes are imported. It's not just Nike, it's everybody. We don't make anything anymore. The whole industry is gone. It would take years and years to bring it back. But Nike's not going to do it. Why is Nike going to invest money in building a factory here in America? For what reason? I mean, they have factories in Vietnam. They can still sell Nikes in America. They just won't sell as many because the price will be a lot higher. So America will be a smaller part of their margin, of their market. But now they can take those sneakers that they're not selling in America and sell them in China, sell them someplace else. Maybe they'll get a little less money than they were getting selling here, but that's better than building a factory here and being completely uncompetitive. Plus, Nike still has to sell shoes all around the world. Why? They're going to build a factory here where the only place in the world anyone would buy the sneakers is in America? Because it's going to be an uncompetitive factory. So it's not going to happen. This is just all a pipe dream. The president is being ill-advised by a bunch of economic ignoramuses.
Now, he's certainly not the only one saying that, but he boiled it down probably the best of anybody that I saw. And that is just common sense. Even Trump himself is conceding, it'll take a year and a half, 2 years, which, what does that mean? It means 5 years, 10 years. You got to get a factory designed. You got to get it approved. And as they keep dropping, when they say the soft part out loud, these are going to be AI modern factories with robotics. That's going to take even longer to build. You're not talking about an old coal-fired plant where you're making Model Ts. You're talking about very technologically complex buildings that have to be built. So
we have to build the robots, and then we have to teach the people how to fix them so that we can give them jobs, right? Yeah. Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. So what Bessent was saying at the beginning there was, we're going to make all this money off tariffs. We're going to make all this tariff money. We're going to make hundreds of billions of dollars from tariffs, but then people are going to build these factories. So then the tariffs will go down, but the revenue will go up because the factories are here. It's a cockamamie scheme from a party that is doing everything possible to avoid doing the obvious, taxing the rich, taking the money, and investing it in infrastructure. It's really not that hard to see. You want to bring manufacturing flooding back, raise the capital gains rate, and lower the tax rate on manufacturing. A big part of the reason all the money flooded into financialization is because you pay lower taxes. Why would you not?
Right.
Why would you not put the money? Why go through all the headaches of building a factory if you make more money off just parking your money in bonds and stocks? Why would you do that? Just change the tax code. I'm not talking about that. It would cost their friends too much money. Now, here's an irony of all this. Surging costs complicate plans for new U.S. factories. Talk about shooting yourself in the dick. Trump's tariff announcement threw a wrench into factory builders' plans and complicates a years-long government effort to reinvigorate U.S. manufacturing. Companies are double-checking the numbers on planned factories or halting them altogether. Tariff-swollen building costs helped to kill a $300 million plastics recycling plant in Erie, Pennsylvania that had been in the works for 4 years. International Recycling Group, helmed by CEO Mitch Hecht, said Thursday it was canceling the factory partly because new duties on material and imported machinery had created, quote, expectations of substantially higher project development costs than anticipated. The past 3 years have seen an explosion of U.S. factory investment, driven in part by billions of dollars in Biden administration subsidies for manufacturers supporting the semiconductor and electric vehicle industries, as well as renewable energy projects. Companies have also sought to shorten supply chains that became strained during the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump told reporters Thursday that it might take several years to achieve his goal of onshoring manufacturing. So, okay, we are not Joe Biden fans here, but the Build Back America part that actually passed, the biggest complaint was it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly
Sure.
enough.
Yeah.
You know, the basic idea, put money into manufacturing, of course, like who could object to that? It's a statement on our system that the amount of money they pass to do it is probably about the most that you could get. Now, instead of Trump going in, he's got a completely compliant Congress who are not willing to do their job. We essentially have a king. These tariffs are in all likelihood illegal. The only way a president can arbitrarily announce a tariff like this is to claim an economic emergency. The case they're making for it being an economic emergency is that the emergency started in 1935. That's not an emergency. That's not an emergency. So these are illegal, but who's going to hold them accountable? You have a Congress and a Senate that's not willing to fulfill its oversight role and not willing to exercise its power of the purse. So you've got a king. You got a king. You got a guy who can arbitrarily do whatever he wants because the other branches of government are not doing their job. If he wanted to use this power in a way that made sense, he would say, yeah, Biden, he had half a brain, but that wasn't a bad idea. But you know what? We're going to make it bigger, beautiful. We're going to build back better than better. We're going to make it great again, right?
Yeah.
But I don't see that coming. All right. So one of the weirdest things about all this is they keep praising Reagan. He brings up Reagan uninvited, I think 3 times in this interview. So this is just one of them.
So, I believe that this is going to work, just like President Reagan believed that supply side economics was going to work. But what I do know that the old system wasn't working.
I think that's right.
And if you look at a system that's not working, you got to be brave to change it. So,
okay. All right. And this is very typical of the Trump team where a lot of people get fooled because, sure, the old system wasn't working. What he's not telling you is Reagan was the John the Baptist of that system and Bill Clinton was its Jesus.
Right.
Reagan built that system. He set the country in this direction. And in many ways, they're giving away the game by praising Reagan because what they're proposing is really Reaganism on steroids. What do you do if you want to run an economy with as little taxes on the rich as possible and with no government investment in the population? Well, you have to justify that by cultivating an almost fanatically religious belief in supply side economics. Now, unlike at Reagan's time, we now have decades of proof that this does not work. And yet he invokes supply side economics, remarkably invokes this as a justification for what they're doing, which supposedly is going to help the working class. So here's a little bit. This was written actually in Trump's first term in 2017. A little recap of Reagan's contribution to the state of affairs today. The problem didn't start in the 1990s. It started in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan, a hero of the Trump administration, was president, and neoliberal economics were first making their mark on policy. Reagan and his ilk distrusted government and believed that the private sector could make the best decisions when left on its own. This ideology ultimately led to the financialization of the U.S. corporation, the process of putting shareholders first, often at the expense of workers and consumers, and its emergence as an actor that takes resources from the economy rather than creating them. This, combined with a government zeal for lowering taxes rather than spending, means no one, not the government and not the private sector, is investing enough in America to keep the economy strong across social classes. In short, government cuts and changes in how corporations operate mean American workers are getting screwed by their own government and their own employers. So this is what I mean when I say what they're doing is Reaganism on steroids, because what Reagan did made it more profitable for companies to invest in financial instruments, to buy back their own stock, than to invest in workers. And because of the fanatical tax cuts of the rich, you don't have the income to reinvest in the economy. This is how we got here. They're just tripling down on what's already been done. And you're seeing some people say, well, but Wall Street's losing a lot of money. They lost a lot of money in the Depression. Did that create employment?
Right. Right.
Now, on Tuesday, I'm going to get more into the nuts and bolts of this. That is beyond the scope of today, the financialization of the economy. But moving along on trickle-down economics, so how did that work out over the course of Reagan's term? The share of income held by the top 1% increased significantly, while the bottom 90% saw their share decline. Between 1977 and 1989, the wealthiest 20% saw their pre-tax income increase by 29%, while the poorest 20% saw their pre-tax income shrink by 9%.
Yep.
From 1981 to 1990, the change in mean family income ranged from a loss of 0.1% annually for families in the lowest quintile to a gain of 2.1% annually for families in the highest quintile. The top 5% of families saw their income increase at a rate of 3.2% annually from 1981 to 1990. It was really with Reagan that you made this break with the New Deal and started to construct the hellscape we live in today. By invoking Reagan repeatedly, they're really telling you what their values are and what kind of an economy they believe in. Ironically, though, they do not have any interest in what the Gipper had to say about tariffs.
At first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity.
Okay, and I think as many people are pointing out about this, this is part of the problem. Reagan remembered what happened the last time we passed these kinds of tariffs, Smoot-Hawley, where 68% drop in exports struck the country, and we drove other countries, other trading partners, to create economic blocks to trade amongst themselves to make up for the tariffs we had imposed, which we're starting to see now. Canada didn't pull it back then. Same thing. We imposed these big tariffs on Canada. What did Canada do? They opened their markets to the UK. And with the UK, they created basically a free trade zone with the other Commonwealth countries. As we'll see, this is what you're starting to see in Asia already. Now, Reagan, temperamentally, was the kind of guy you would think would like the idea of tariffs, but he experienced them. He actually lived through them. So this was his take on it. Anything before we continue?
No, well, I mean, look, you saw the numbers there, the Reagan era. They speak for themselves. I mean, they're saying they're going to
he thinks supply
transition
side
to
economics work.
robotics.
What does that tell
I mean,
you?
it's not. Yeah, there's no. I don't understand what the theory is of the case. Even if you were to get this manufacturing up and running in a year, which is impossible. I mean, it's just totally like what they're talking about is just impossible.
Of course,
and
of course.
Even if it
year
were
and a half,
impossible,
2 years, that's nuts.
That's insane.
You're
even
destroying the building projects that are already in progress with the tariffs.
Right. And I would say even if that wasn't insane, you're doing this at a time when the working class is already decimated and the middle class is already squeezed.
And you're cutting
to the point where they have
services.
and you're cutting social services. Like they have no time for this transition. That's what guys like Bill Ackman are saying, which we'll get to in the next piece. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So Tucker asked him about China.
How is China as a nation going to, I mean, this is such a big challenge. It's directly in their face. It's about every country on the globe, but it's really more than any other country about China, I think it's fair to say. How are they going to respond? What's their retaliation look like?
Well, I don't know if they can retaliate for a couple of reasons.
I'm just going to point out, I believe this interview was done on April 3rd. It's what happened on April 4th. So
34%.
Apparently, they figured out a way to retaliate by slapping a 34% tax on all U.S. imports, but we'll continue.
If you look at the history, and I used to teach economic history, and when you look at the history, we are the debtor nation.
Yes.
We have the trade deficits. The surplus nation is in the weaker position because the Chinese business model, and Tucker, by the way, the Chinese business model and the economy are the most unbalanced, imbalanced in the history of the modern world. We've never seen anything like this in terms of their export level relative to their GDP, relative to their population. So I think it is going to be very difficult for them to try to change the model. They're in a deflationary recession/depression right now. They're trying to export their way out of it, and we can't let them do that. But over the next few years, they may have to come around because I think their business model is broken. I think President Trump's broken their business model with these tariffs.
So you're describing, the famous scenario where if you take a bank loan, the bank is in charge. They can repossess whatever you borrowed against. But if you take a big enough loan, you're kind of in charge of the bank.
Exactly. And they've just got such a big deficit with us that
they need our markets.
They can't survive without them.
Okay. So that's his theory. I can't say if that's incorrect, that China can't survive without it. I can tell you that even before these tariffs passed, in anticipation of these tariffs passing, Trump has accomplished the impossible. I will give him that. He got South Korea, China, and Japan to get together to create a trade bloc. These are people who have a long, millennium-long history of hating each other's guts. The Japanese don't like the Koreans, vice versa. China has never forgiven Japan for World War II. But hey, man, Trump got them to the table, so kudos. I'll give him that. He's making Asia great again. Is he right that we're too big to fail and China just cannot afford to do without our market? Well, as I said, he gave this interview the day before they slapped the U.S. with 34% tariffs. Now, if you were to ask him, and he may have said this in interviews subsequently, he probably thinks it's a bluff, or in the end, they're going to have to cave in. I think the arrogance of the Trump team is to assume that they can muscle everybody. China doesn't think in terms of years. They don't think in terms of decades. They think in terms of centuries. If they need to outlast this, they will. Also remember, there is a long and ugly history of the West imposing its will on China, and they still remember the Opium Wars, and it defines a lot of their dealings with us. The idea that you're going to deal with China in a very high-handed and humiliating way, and China will not turn around and say, you know what, we're going to have to go through some hardship for a while, but in order to preserve our society and our independence, we're going to break you by not giving in, and we're going to ride this out. That idea does not seem to occur to them, even though that's very consistent culturally with what we know of China.
Well, yeah, and there's no accounting for that. I thought the same thing. I mean, forget about centuries. We think in terms of days, weeks, months at the longest.
Quarter,
at the longest,
the
we think of the quarter. We think of right. So we think in terms of 90-day periods, which really means you're thinking day to day. Really means you're following the trends day to day. And so yeah, I mean, I would not bet that they are as dependent on us as he says, for reasons that you said. You know, I think they're playing a long game. They're willing to suffer much more than we are. That does become just a cultural difference there, which I think gives them an edge. And the world has been figuring out ways to work around us for a while now. And Joe Biden really accelerated that in a big way with his disastrous foreign policies and weaponization of the dollar.
Yes.
So I don't think there is a safe assumption in that way anymore. And that is the arrogance of these people. And that ultimately is why I don't really think that the deep states, for all the talk, was especially terrified of Trump coming back. Because ultimately, just as Joe Biden does, Donald Trump believes in the United States as the rightful hegemon in the world. And as long as you're on board with that, I think they can pretty much work with you.
The best, and I'll get into this more on Tuesday. Here, we just got into why everything that Bessent said here is BS, whether intentional or not. I've seen more than one respectable economist theorize that overall this is part of a plan to have their cake and eat it too, by weakening the dollar but preserving it as the reserve currency by forcing nations to peg their currency back to the dollar as in the Bretton Woods era in exchange for our lowering our tariffs and giving them military support. Like I said, we'll cover that in more detail on Tuesday. I'm not going with the assumption that you might get on MSNBC that they're just crazy assholes without a plan. I think they have a plan. I don't think they're really telling you what it is in interviews like this. But looking at everyone who's been parsing it out, that seems to be the most reasonable conclusion. That they're using the tariffs to create chaos, to force people to join a dollar zone.
Please clap.